will continue this fine day of presentations with Hizmet in Africa. I am Martha Ann Kirk from San Antonio, Texas, and it is a pleasure to be with people from 22 different countries in this fine gathering. So I would like to introduce our three panelists. Practicing Ubuntu through Education, a case study of the Hizmet Movement schools in South Africa by Aydin Inal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aydin Inal. I've come from Cape Town, South Africa. In my presentation, I'm going to report on a study which I did in around 2018 and 2019. And I'm going to combine it with a little bit of more insight into the Ubuntu philosophy of education. Just see first if this one will treat me well. Okay, right. Okay, this morning you've already listened to a presentation from South Africa, and that is the Hizmet Movement's activities in South Africa. There are a couple of organizations focusing on different fields, such as education, dialogue, outreach, etc. My research initially was about manifestation of Fethullah Gülen's education philosophy in the Hizmet schools in South Africa. That was my original study. So the reason why I undertook the study was because I thought, although a lot has been written and discussed around Hoca Efendi's philosophy of education, not much has been done in terms of an in-depth study of how this philosophy actually manifests itself in the schools, in the lives of the teachers and the students. You've already seen a map of South Africa this morning. I just wanted to show it again. And partly, I'm also assuming that by now we know that South Africa is the country and Africa is the continent, right? Starting from Mediterranean right down to Cape Town. So in South Africa, the locations you see on the map are where the schools that I studied are located. In South Africa, I have to distinguish between two types of schools. So Hizmet Movement affiliated schools are of two types. One is secular schools, which are run under Horizon Education Trust, and the others are Islamic schools, which are run under a different trust, which falls outside of my study. So as you can see, they are in 4 locations, and in total there are 6 schools, because in some of the locations there are 2 schools. These are the 4 locations where the schools are located. Right, first one is in Cape Town, and in Cape Town school, when we look at the schools, they reflect the demographics of the location where they are. Cape Town school is primarily Muslim in terms of the religious demographics, and they are co-ed schools. Johannesburg school is predominantly black students. Durban is mostly Indian, and Pretoria is racially and religiously mixed. Right. When I did my study, I've developed a framework on Hoca Efendi's philosophy of education, and I'm not going to talk much on this because I want to move forward and discuss other aspects, and this will hopefully be available for others who want to study. What I basically did, I've identified certain perspectives and values which fed into the philosophy of education, and then I've studied them under 2 themes, which were aims of education and process of educational processes. Little bit details on this. These are the 2 broad themes on Gülen's philosophy of education. Again, I'm not going to talk much on this, except that this is what has happened. Now I want to give you a bit of a historical background, because I'm going to talk about, as you see on my title, it's about practicing Ubuntu. I will bring the discussion towards Ubuntu, but before that, I think it's important that we remember a bit of history of South Africa. Remember, South Africa comes from a colonial history, and education landscape also has changed, developed, improved, digressed, progressed according to this political situation. Before colonial times, it was obviously like in most societies, education was about transfer of skills, which happened within the society, within the workplace. And with the arrival of the colonialism, obviously the roles that are being assigned to different racial groups have started to take a new shape, and then education also had to follow that, or now there was a mutual sort of influence between the two, between the educational landscape and the socio-economic landscape, because educational space has been segregated just like the social space, and this segregation in the education also resulted in a segregated society, which identified obviously mostly the Europeans as the masters and the black South Africans as the subservient population. And formal education basically mostly started with the arrival of the missionaries. They came and opened mission schools, and the journey of the mission schools as well, they were independent. Then the state wanted to take them over, then some of them handed them over, some of them did not, etc. We see that kind of a trajectory. Then apartheid regime was established in 1948, as you might know, and in 1958 they brought in a legislation which was called Bantu education system. Bantu was the name given to the blacks in South Africa, and this education and after democracy, which we take as 1994 when they had the democratic elections. In 1996, they have brought in the new South African Schools Act, which aimed at healing some of the past injustices. And since then, there has been discussion about the kind of curriculum in South Africa. The curriculum has changed a number of times, and every time the aim is to make it fit the new South Africa in a little more relevant manner. And then, of course, in all these discussions, the calls, it's not a new call on discussion, obviously, but there's a new voice rising in terms of bringing in more African philosophy into educational space and also making education more relevant. And when we discuss African philosophy, obviously what comes into mind is Ubuntu, which is the dominant philosophy in Africa. Although Ubuntu is a concept, it was born in Southern Africa, but we use it primarily as when we discuss African philosophy. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Ubuntu, but I want to move a few slides forward first, because apparently in Boston Celtics, is the basketball team that I'm not a fan, NBA fan, but that's what I heard, that they have implemented the philosophy of Ubuntu with some success. So I want to share a 1-minute video with you. If you can help me to play a video there. I'm not sure if the sound is available. If not, we're in trouble. Oh, sorry. Perhaps I'll move on. Okay. Basically, they talk about the philosophy of Ubuntu, how they've implemented and how it's available on YouTube. So I recommend you go and watch it later on. You will have to depend on me now to tell you what it is. Right, Ubuntu basically. Okay, yeah. I'm sure you all know Archbishop Desmond Tutu. In his words, I'm moving slides back and forth because I thought I'll first start with this. Archbishop Tutu defines Ubuntu as following. A person with Ubuntu is open and available to the others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole, and is diminished when the others are humiliated, or diminished when the others are tortured or oppressed or treated as if they were less than who they are. And Ubuntu is as a philosophy. A human being is a human being because of other human beings, or I am because you are. There are different translations of Ubuntu philosophy. What it basically underpins is that our humanity exists because of each other's humanity. And it articulates interdependence and a very deep rootedness within the community. So it draws our attention from more individualism towards more communal approach. And Ubuntu, obviously, there are values which we'll come back to later on. Ubuntu philosophy in education, it complements the Western positivistic linear mechanistic paradigms. So it's not recommended that Ubuntu as a philosophy of education is brought in and replaces the existing mostly European inspired education philosophy, but it's recommended that it complements the existing philosophies. So that's a little few words about Ubuntu. Now I'm going to move on to the research which I've done. Again, I will try and move fast. In the original research, I've looked at the schools, and I've done the school in two stages. One, the research in two stages. First stage was document analysis. I've looked at the school's documents. I've divided them into different categories, etc. So without going into much details. And then I've done interviews with the teachers, administrators, and some of the graduates. And the interviews are obviously semi-structured interviews. I had questions prepared, then it also, we went deeper into some of the discussions. I had 24 participants, there's just some of them. I have given information about the participants themselves. And then as a result of the interviews, these were the themes which came out in the interviews. In other words, let's say communication was one theme which came out, but it had sub-themes. When I analyzed the documents, I used the framework which I've showed you earlier. I used that framework for the document analysis, and this was my interviews analysis. Right. But I'm going to present, okay. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to present my findings under these four themes or four headings. Let's move on. Okay, this part is right. Good. The first theme that I'm going to share with you is an academic success of the schools. The schools are known to be primarily academic institutions, and they are known to be doing well academically, etc. For example, they take part in the maths Olympiads, and first ever, as you can see, the first ever black student who participated and won a medal at the International Mathematics Olympiad came from one of these schools. So that is just to illustrate the academic emphasis on academic at the school. Secondly is, not sure why this is doing that. Okay. Obviously, those who are familiar with the Hizmet education model, there is something called Rehberlik, which is a value education program, and that plays a major role within the internal programs of the Hizmet school, and it also does in the schools which are under study here. And one teacher, for example, shared that if a school is not doing its Rehberlik program, then the whole point of having a school actually falls away, because that's the kind of importance that they attach to guidance programs. Another theme is the interpretations and the perceptions about the role of the teacher. If you look at the first sentence there, you will see that the teachers have a personal influence on the students, and then it says teachers are available to the students. Now let's remember the Ubuntu philosophy right at the beginning. A person with Ubuntu is supposed to be open and available to others. And right at the end, as you can see, this is again a dominant theme within these participants, is that right in the last sentence, a teacher says serving people is serving God. Although, as I mentioned, these schools are secular schools. They don't teach religion at all within the school, but the teacher still believes whatever he does under the secular environment still falls under what he calls is the pleasure of God. Then community engagement is another okay. Community engagement is another theme which came out strongly in my study. The schools have deliberate events and programs which are aimed at bringing community together, and that community involves the school community within the school, the parents, and the surrounding communities. They will have, as you all know, they will have iftar dinners for the school community, plus the neighbors. They will have social gatherings for various occasions, and they will do outreach activities. And the third from the bottom, as you'll see, the schools offer support and training to students and teachers from disadvantaged communities. And I link this with what Ubuntu calls, in the short video which we couldn't watch, you will also see that Ubuntu actually promotes a collective progress. In other words, it's about progressing together. As sometimes popularly we say, leaving no one behind kind of philosophy. So Ubuntu says you don't leave anyone behind. If we progress together, and if we fail together. So that practices there, it actually speaks directly to the spirit of Ubuntu. And again, the students are invited from other schools which are more disadvantaged to come and sit in the same classes as the school's class. These are of course extra classes. Right. We're doing fine with time?
Yeah, it's time.
Finished.
Okay. It wasn't like
1 minute.
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Okay. In my conclusion, well, let me say a couple of things about conclusion, and then I'll end off. Firstly, as I said, my research was on influence of manifestations of Japanese philosophy of education, which is more implicit than explicit, one of the things, and also an emphasis on community. It's aligned with the spirit of Ubuntu. Teachers being available, that's also something that aligns with the spirit of Ubuntu. And two recommendations, which if I may, Chair, is that one of the things, recommendations that I've made, and is that the philosophy of education which is at the school are not articulated well within the school environment and the documents. And I made a recommendation that is done because so it filters down the school into the practice. And secondly is about the rehberlik and guidance programs. That's also done in practice, but it needs a more coherent policy so that it can be implemented in other schools, and also it can be assessed for progress. Thank you so much.